So some people are saying there's a fundamental problem with maritime decarbonisation, that the gains from reducing the fuel costs go to the charterer, that's the cargo owner, while the ship owner has to pay for the energy-saving devices and systems involved in getting there, because under most types of charter party, the cargo owner pays for the fuel. Charterers can still try to make it worthwhile to ship owners to invest in decarbonisation systems, such as by seeking to choose ships that have better performance. But this only works so far, because when they need a ship, they need to take what's available to them. And the current system makes it very hard to know how good a ship is performing before you charter it. So in our webinar today, we're going to hear about another possible way to solve the problem, splitting the benefit with a clever use of data. Our company presenting today, Toqua, has done a lot of research on the issue with leading owners and charterers, and they've developed a solution which enables ship owners with better performing vessels to earn more money. And they've put together a beta user group for the solution, with owners and charterers representing over 2,500 vessels, and it's open for more companies to join. Toqua is based in Ghent in Belgium, and their main business is software to make ship performance models. We're going to hear today from Casimir Morobe, the founder. We'll have a presentation from Casimir of about 25 minutes, then we'll take your questions. You can put them in the Q&A box at any time. And I'd like to invite Casimir to start the talk.
Thank you, Carl. Good morning. Nice to meet you all. My name is Casimir. I'm the founder and CEO of Toqua. Toqua is, as Carl said, a maritime AI company based in Belgium. I started the company about 4.5 years ago after writing my master's dissertation with the Belgian shipping company CMB. They were sitting on a lot of operational data, noon reports, high frequency data. And then we figured out how to apply machine learning to that data to create efficiency gains, to reduce fuel and increase earnings. We saw a lot of potential for this technology to be used by the whole shipping industry. And so we decided to found Toqua to bring that technology to as many ships as soon as possible. So that's basically what we have been doing the past 4 years, because it's pretty much a no-brainer. It's instantly implementable, marginal costs. It saves roughly 5% in fuel, maybe in exceptional cases 10%, which is all very great. And that's the core business of Toqua today. And we're growing quickly. I think we doubled the amount of vessels we serve in the first 4 years of this year. So that's our core business today. But today I'd actually like to talk about something else, which is kind of the next chapter, or let's say the future, where we look at with Toqua. Because today we're focusing on, let's say, the first easy 5 to 10% of decarbonization and cost savings that you can look at, and that's going great. But today I'd like to talk about the next 90%. How do we accelerate decarbonization, not just in the very short term, but how do we get decarbonization accelerating all the way to zero? And that requires more structural change and to solve some more fundamental problems that shipping is facing beyond just efficiency gains. And so that's what I would like to discuss with everyone here today. I'll start by discussing the major problem, which we see as the #1 challenge holding back decarbonization in shipping today. And then I'd like to talk through some solutions to solve this and to accelerate the decarbonization of shipping. So with that said, I'll share my screen, and I always also look forward to your questions at the end of this presentation. So let's start with the problem. And let's give a bit of context about shipping as well, of course. So let's talk with how business is being done in shipping today by talking about speed fuel warranties and warranted conditions. So I'll mostly be discussing the case where the owner of the vessel does a long-term time charter out, and then the charterer, who sort of rents the vessel, to put it in simple terms, pays for the fuel. As part of that agreement, a speed fuel warranty is made, where the owner basically gives a sort of promise saying my vessel is capable of achieving that speed at this consumption. So it's basically a promise in terms of efficiency, because it is at the end of the day the charterer who pays the fuel and who has those costs. So the more efficient the vessel is, the less cost the charterer has to make to operate it, and the more it should value that vessel. And so this is a very standard concept in shipping, and people spend a lot of attention to these specific figures. But what's important as well are the warranted conditions. So for which conditions does this promise or does this warranty hold true? And there you can see it, it seems a bit like, the small print, as they would say in a contract, where you get a lot of abouts, a lot of exceptions, only up until this wind state, no adverse currents, et cetera, et cetera. So it gets quite complicated when you go into the small print here. And what we see in practice is that people spend a lot of attention on these first figures, and then this is, glanced over and maybe not given the attention it deserves. So first thing we'll discuss here is what implications do these warranted conditions really have? And we wrote a paper on this with an expert from the industry, analyzing how different wordings of these warranted conditions can have impacts on the commercial outcome. So you can have variations in many components. Here we're listing, for example, different wind conditions that you warrant, different waves, different how currents are interpreted, and there's many more factors. These are just 3 examples. And then we looked, okay, what is the impact on the speed fuel figures if you play around with these wordings? And what we found was quite surprising. What you can see here is kind of the conclusion, where this is exactly the same vessel. And so all 3 speed fuel curves here are based on exactly the same vessel, exactly the same performance. The only difference is what wording of warranted conditions is applied. So if you take the most restrictive wordings, which are kind of in favor of the owner, let's say, then you can warrant that vessel at 20 metric tons a day, which is quite efficient. But if you take the least restrictive wordings, that same vessel has to be described at 34 metric tons a day. So that's a huge difference. It's like almost unbelievably wide, that spread, but it is actually and unfortunately true. There is just so much room to play around with the words that it has a huge impact on the actual numbers that you can warrant. So exactly the same vessel can be warranted at 20 metric tons or 34 metric tons, depending on what combination of words you use. So that itself is, quite shocking. Secondly, it's not just about the absolute speed fuel figures. It's also about how the claims process works, right? So if the vessel underperforms, in theory, you're saying, okay, if it underperforms, you can make a claim, and then you can recuperate whatever fuel was consumed in excess or speed was lost compared to what promise the owner made towards the charter. Unfortunately, that claim, has certain coverage within certain warranted conditions again. And so again, you can play around with the wordings there. And if you take the most restrictive wording of warranted conditions, and we apply this to about 300 days of sailing at sea, 0% of 300 days sailing at sea was covered within warranty, so nothing. So basically you have no guarantee at all if you would have these wordings in place. If we take a more average case of wordings, like what's more typical in the industry, about 25% of all operating conditions was covered. But it's still problematic. It still means that 3/4 of all the time at sea was just not covered and you wouldn't be able to claim for. And then in a less restrictive case, about 80% was covered. And then obviously if you add extrapolation clauses, for example, 100% can be covered. But so the point we're trying to make here is, again, in this small wording, there can be huge differences on what the eventual commercial outcome can be of a claim, or what you're actually being warranted or promised, or how protected you are as a charterer. And so putting these 2 things together, our initial conclusion is that shipping's current speed fuel warranty system is broken. First of all, it's so complicated that its users do not understand it. And it's not because, people in shipping, okay, let me rephrase that. It's so complicated, users do not understand it, while shipping is full of highly intelligent people. It's just that the wording is intentionally vague and opaque, and every little word that changes has huge ramifications on the commercial outcome, that it's completely impossible to expect people in chartering who have to make multiple deals, very quickly to understand all these different aspects of the wording. I mean, you even need like experts in arbitration, and even they don't agree what every word exactly means. So it's just, intentionally opaque and complex. So that's the first reason why we think it's a very flawed system. Secondly, it's supposed to be a warranty, a sort of promise or a protection, but it rarely actually warrants much. It provides very limited protection to the charter, as I showed earlier, due to all the exceptions and the wordings and the limited interpretability. Third, the result is that there's a lot of claims, a lot of back and forth, a lot of bickering, which loses a lot of time and money spent in a very unproductive way, which is a shame in an industry like shipping, where companies are typically already quite understaffed. So then losing a lot of time on stuff like claims is just not the way to improve this industry. And then lastly, claims are also very damaging for relations. I mean, from one day you're going to doing business with one another, and the next day you're fighting each other, and the next day you're doing business again. And that's really a shame in an industry that's all about relations and trust, that you have to have this fighting and this bickering due to this opaque system. Then the only, if I'm being really critical, the only thing that the current system does well is conceal underperformance of poorly managed and older vessels, so they can still earn a buck in the market. You can basically trick the system, play around with it a lot if you're savvy, to seem competitive in the market and still get fixed and get the earnings that you're looking for. And so my question is that really the system that shipping needs and wants in 2025, when decarbonization is top of the agenda and there's so many challenges? Do we really want to stick to a system like this? And we spoke to a lot of leading charterers in the dry bulk space to ask how this issue is affecting them today. And all 10 of them confirmed that unreliable warranties is one of the biggest challenges they face day to day, because they need to estimate their earnings, their TCE, and one of the biggest uncertainties is the vessel that I'm gonna fix actually gonna perform as warranted, or is there gonna be a huge risk of it over-consuming and me not making the money I expect to make on this trade? And on average, they saw a discrepancy between the actual performance and the warranted performance of 7.6%. So kind of on average, a vessel underperforms 7.6% compared to how it's actually described, with extreme cases going to 20, 35%, even more. And I think this last figure is actually the most interesting one. On average, they believe that they can only recuperate 32% of the losses due to underperformance via claims. So that means that the vast majority of what they incurred in unexpected costs due to underperformance, they have to bear themselves, even though there was a warranty in place. It typically falls for the majority on the charter. And so if you apply these figures to, let's say, an average Panamax using $2.5 million in a bunker a year, and you apply this average 7.6%, that means you would be losing around 190K a year due to average underperformance. And then if you can recuperate maybe 32% of that, you're still losing roughly 130K per vessel per year just due to missed warranties. And that's obviously a big, financial cost and a financial issue. But even more important and more pressing is that it's, one of the biggest challenges holding back decarbonization in shipping, because of a sort of split incentive issue. Currently, an owner's reasoning goes something along the lines of, why would I invest in rotor sails or similar, efficiency technology to save X metric tons a day if charters are not willing to pay extra for those savings? And then vice versa, a charter's reasoning goes, how can I pay a premium for a more efficient vessel if everybody's lying about their numbers and, using vague warranties, etc. anyway? So it kind of creates a sort of catch-22 where there's just a lack of trust, and as such, it's hard to work out the benefits for both sides. And this is not only bad for charterers, it's actually also a huge problem for owners. We spoke to owners and they said that on average, for every $1 of fuel they can save in efficiency by investing in decarbonization technology, they see that in the market, they only get a return on that of $0.25 added to the higher rate. So that basically means there's a negative leverage of 4x for every decarbonization investment they can consider, which is obviously putting a huge strain on every, investment in decarbonization they can make, kind of tying the hands of owners, making it very hard for them to make decarbonization investments, even though there is good working technology out there. There's plenty of options out there today, but this is one of the core issues hindering the adoption of those technologies. And so the question is, why are we holding on to this flawed system? Why are we relying on like a filter-based analysis that becomes so complex and vague that it defeats its initial purpose? Well, first of all, it's simple and it's enforceable. It's currently the system in place, and there's no real alternative, and it's quite easy to understand or to check at least. Secondly, an argument we often hear is that data quality is hard to trust. And it's true that data quality in shipping is far from perfect, but we see it's very rapidly improving due to AIS, improved weather data, also mandatory data verification by class societies. So it's the best it's ever been, and it's drastically improving. Secondly, if that data is good enough to measure carbon taxes and all of the regulations coming up, which are talking about a lot of money, why would it not be good enough to measure performance the same? And lastly, I think the whole data quality argument is a bit of a non-argument, because the current system suffers equally, if not more, from poor data quality. So I think moving to different, more sophisticated ways will even alleviate that problem rather than be exacerbated by it. So I think the main reason that we're not moving to a more sophisticated system is that normalizing data for secondary conditions is very complex. A ship is just something, highly complicated. The effect of waves, wind, draft, speed, changing performance over time. It's just something very sophisticated. And I think that is the core challenge holding us to this outdated system that we're using today. So that brings us to the second point, which is, new technology, new opportunities. The current system with the abouts, etc., I think dates from 1913, if I can believe the internet. So it's like pre-World War I definitions and technology that's based on. And back then, it made a lot of sense to define something with abouts and a lot of uncertainty and a lot of vague words, because back then it was basically impossible to know what the vessel was really performing. I mean, there was no reliable weather data, there was no reliable data being collected. So it's completely reasonable back then to use all of this vague legal wording. But today we have new technology, and that opens up new opportunities. And that's what I'd like to discuss here. We see that, first of all, many vessels are shifting away from just collecting low-frequency noon reports to collecting high-frequency sensor data, suddenly having millions of data points available each day. And that creates a lot more data. Both noon reports are becoming plentiful, but also sensor data leads to a lot more data, but also a lot more noise. So just more data by itself is not going to be the answer. And that's where Toqua and our technology enters the picture. We try to facilitate how to go from this big, raw, noisy data, be it noon reports, be it sensor data, to go to sharp insights and good models. And we see three core challenges that you need to overcome to get there. The first is the impact from secondary conditions. So the impact of waves, wind, draft, trim, current, salinity, water depth, and many more. Explain why this is, not just a two-dimensional curve, but a very high-dimensional problem, and you need to account for all those dimensions. Secondly, there's the need to model non-reference conditions. A lot of the traditional modeling approaches, they start from sea trial curves and what have you, which are valid for design drafts, design speeds, good weather conditions. But once you want to analyze the actual operational conditions of a vessel, which can be very different from those design conditions or from good weather, then they tend to become inaccurate or unable to account for those other conditions. So that's the second challenge. How do you model all operational conditions in a highly accurate way? And lastly, the performance of a vessel is continuously evolving over time. So it's not just a single model and you're done. You need to continuously retrain and update that to reflect for changes in hull and propeller fouling, paint degradation, cleanings, retrofits, and so on. So that's exactly what we do at Toqua using physics-informed AI. We go from this big, raw, noisy data, compensate for secondary conditions to paint a very clear picture of performance. Then that model also allows us to simulate all different operating conditions. So different waves, different wave angles, wind, draft, speed, currents, what have you. So you can basically simulate the full operational spectrum and normalize for all secondary conditions. And then lastly, the model is continuously retraining on the latest data to show today's performance while keeping track of how performance has been evolving over time. A more technical way of viewing the same would be like this. You have all your variables. You can basically change them and then say, okay, at this speed, what's going to be my RPM, power, and most importantly, fuel consumption for these conditions. So this is like a huge step forwards compared to more traditional approaches, which are limited to conditions, which have a lot of uncertainty, which are based on averaging or filtering, where this actually learns and interprets all secondary conditions and can normalize for them. And just to put this maybe in perspective to what are the other approaches out there today to assess vessel performance and to normalize for secondary conditions. This is from a paper we wrote a few years ago, where you have obviously very traditional, bit outdated approaches. You have what we call the standard approach, which is you take, a sea trial curve, for example, you apply some filtering, some in the wave corrections, maybe some updates over time, similar to what like an ISO 19130 recommends. And that's what most shipping companies, most software systems are using today. An alternative out there is pure black box machine learning approaches. So you just take a lot of data, you throw it into the model, something comes out, but you don't know what or why. And basically, if the data is bad or if the model learned in an incorrect way, it can be inaccurate or physically even unsafe, the output and the predictions that the model provides. So we believe for shipping, this is not a viable option. It's too important for it to be reliable, consistent, physically robust, and safe. And so that's why we as Toqua have for the last 4 years been developing physics-informed machine learning, which is a sort of hybrid approach. So you still learn from the operational data because, the operational data that these vessels collect has huge value, right? There's just an enormous potential in that data. The question is just how do you get the value out of that data in a way that's correct and safe by not throwing overboard, all the physical knowledge we have about vessels. And so that's exactly what physics-informed machine learning does. In the learning architecture of the machine learning model, you embed physical rules and naval architecture principles. So the learning is kind of constrained by physics, but still giving it enough freedom to actually learn from the data. And we've seen that gives, incredibly accurate models while always being, physically sound and robust. The way we are positioned as Toqua in the industry is also quite unique as a result of this, because early on we realized how incredibly important these speed fuel figures are. They basically lie at the heart of every single operational, technical, commercial decision, and every percentage of accuracy you can gain there leads to sharper decisions down the line, saving a lot of fuel or earning a lot more money. So as Toqua, we don't collect any data, we just tap into any of the data sources you might already have. We do a data validation to make sure whatever data you're sharing, that any incorrect points are filtered out and flagged. Then we create our models, which we call ship kernels. You can, follow that process via the interface. And then we do a very in-depth validation of the model as well to show our users they can trust it. It's been checked, it's been validated, before we then share that model via an API back to end applications that can benefit from it, like routing tools, VMS systems, performance systems, or in-house developed solutions by larger shipping companies. So that, as I said, that's been our core business for the last years, is helping shipping companies save fuel by getting the most out of their data to take more efficient decisions and stuff like that. But this same technology can also be applied to solve the problem that we're discussing today. And that's what I'm going to get to in just a second. One thing about the validation is that it's not enough to just say, here's a model, trust me. You need to have very transparent and data-driven validation on a continuous basis. So this is an example of what we do in our system. For every voyage that a vessel sails, we're continuously assessing, the period at sea. How much did our model estimate the consumption should be for this voyage? What was the actually measured fuel on board? What's the discrepancy? And as such, what's the accuracy of our model on the most recent voyage? And we are continuously doing this over time. So as new data enters the system, a new voyage, has been sailed, we compare the prediction against the actual consumption. And we think it's critical for any performance system to have this, to let your customers hold you accountable of your accuracy and to be transparent towards them on why and how they can trust your models. So I think this is an incredibly important factor to get that trust in the models. And that brings us to the solution. So we have a problem, we have technology. I mean, I just explained our technology, but obviously, there's other ways of doing this. But there is much more modern technology than there was in 1913. So that brings us to the solution. How do we solve this hurdle holding back decarbonization? And I think the answer always takes a shape like this. I mean, I've spoken to many people in the industry about this. I'm not the first to say this, and I definitely won't be the last. But it has to be something along these lines, where the industry needs to reward efficiency. So we need to align the incentives between owners and charterers, so both can benefit from it. Because today in the current system, the warranties are exclusively penalizing almost always. So there's a certain warranted performance, which is already pretty vague. Then if you underperform by a lot, you can actually make a claim. And then if you're lucky and the claim falls in unwarranted conditions and you fight back and forth, maybe you can get 50% of what you're actually owed. So there's only a penalty to be had here. So that's why the incentives are all wrong in the current system. And in the future system, in a solution, there should be a more transparent way of tracking the actual performance. And then if a vessel underperforms, then you should get a penalty. And if the vessel performs better, then you should get a financial reward as an owner. So there's actually an incentive for you to be better, to be transparent, to work together. And so that should be the goal of the industry as a whole to work towards, because that will kind of allow people to work together and drastically accelerate decarbonization. A practical example of how that could look like is to work with a smarter warranty, or like a smart warranty that covers all conditions and is continuously tracked and validated by data. So not like the opaque current system with words and then vague claims, but a continuous, transparent tracking of the performance and comparison against the warranted performance. So what you see here is in red, you have the operational performance, which goes up and down as it does in shipping, but normalized for secondary conditions. So normalized for wind, waves, draft, speed, etc., kind of bringing it back to a single condition. And the interesting part about that is that allows us to extrapolate the warranty and the warranted performance also to all conditions. So it's not only valid in good weather or in a certain speed, you can kind of extrapolate it to all operating conditions of the vessel and continuously compare the warranted performance against the operational performance and see how the two compare and go up and down relative to one another over time. So that is like a practical way of implementing that. And then that allows us to move away from warranted performance, which is more like a theoretical, vague, abstract concept that's almost too hard to understand, towards just tracking actual performance. And that allows greener vessels to earn a premium in the market, which they definitely deserve. Because then you can fix vessels according to their actual performance. Let's say you agree on a rate of 20,000. And then if the performance of the vessel, for whatever reason, deteriorates over time, your rate drops to 19,000, so you earn less. But then if you invest in cleaning or greener technology or energy savings devices and the performance improves throughout the time charter, then your earnings, your higher rate basically increases. And that way you have, very clearly aligned incentives between owners and charters, benefiting both sides to work together to invest in decarbonization. And that will, drastically change the landscape and allow owners to invest into decarbonization by just having a transparent third-party performance yardstick. I think is going to really shift the way people view performance and can work together and the commercials of shipping work. And so if we get to this stage, there's huge benefits to be had, both for charters and for owners. From a charter's point of view, you have much more certainty on the dollar outcome of your core business, right? So instead of having to fix a vessel and not knowing if it will actually perform as warranted, you can simply validate the performance pre-fixture so you know exactly what the vessel is going to consume. You can use it in your calculations and estimations and be very sure of the profit you're going to make. At the same time, it also helps you reduce your carbon footprint by indirectly preferring more efficient vessels who have less emissions. And then I think a third aspect, which is also key, is today vessels are often operating at non-optimal speeds because they have to follow the warranted speeds in the warranty if they want to be able to make a claim. So often vessels sail way too fast or what have you, and then have to sit idle in port and wait because that's the warranted speed. And if you want to make a claim, we have to sail at that speed. And that's just, that concept in itself is too crazy. You cannot explain this to somebody from outside of shipping that's how shipping works in 2025. So also there, having a more data-driven warranty that can expand to all operating conditions allows the charterer to sail at whatever speed is optimal to them, which allows them to save fuel, arrive at the right time, but is also good for the owner because their vessel will have less emissions, better ratings, etc. So there's only to be gained there. And then the last two things, charterers lose a lot less time on claims because there's basically no need for claims anymore. You're just being transparent. You're being above board with one another. You agree on the definitions. You agree on the tracking. And you also get a much better relation because of not having claims, which allows you to do more business, which is what shipping is all about. But also for the owner, there's huge improvements to be had here. For owners with modern fleets, green vessels, they get a huge extra selling point, right? Instead of just being another vessel, another commodity in the market, you can say, look, compared to all these other vessels, I can be transparent, I can be upfront, I can prove my performance, and you can see black on white what your consumption is going to be and how much more efficient I am than these other vessels. So you get a leg up in the market, you get preferred over other vessels. Secondly, it also opens up the possibility to earn more money with those vessels instead of just earning kind of the same as other vessels because people don't really appreciate efficiency as much. With the system, you value efficiency almost at 100%. So every ton of fuel you save, you will earn more. Which is great for modern fleets so they can finally get that green premium, that green return that they deserve. Third, it allows you to decarbonize in a profitable way. It's no longer a cost or a regulatory thing you have to do. It will just become something that makes sense to do because it will earn you money. And that will allow every shipping company to invest much more in decarbonization and emit much less. And then similarly as for charterers, you also have much less time you lose on claims and you'll get a much better relation with charterers. So I think over time, this will create a sort of two-tier market where more premium owners, more premium charters will work together in such a system because it just provides huge benefits. And then over time, the majority of the other industry will follow over time because there's just huge benefits to be had by this. I mean, yeah, it's one of the biggest hurdles holding back decarbonization today. So I think some system like this will take place over the next years and will allow shipping to invest much more in decarbonization. So that brings us to the next question, how to get there, because it's very nice to dream up like an ideal scenario like this, but the reality is that we're not there today at all, and it's going to take a long road to get there because there's many actors in shipping, many incentives going on, and the question is, how do we get there? Shipping is self-regulating, so there needs to be initiative from within the industry to take steps. And as Toqua, we have tried to, paint a trajectory where we see how we can start small and then build up slowly to get to that full system at the end of it. But we need to, make it work with small steps, with the incentives being right for both owners and charterers every step of the way. And we kind of broke it down into 3 phases, where phase 1 is just kind of prevention. So helping charterers avoid fixing underperforming vessels pre-fixture, because after you fix the vessel, as we showed earlier, you're kind of stuck with it. You can try and claim, but you won't get back everything. So you kind of, once you fixed it, you've kind of lost already. So something charters can do is just before fixture, use a system where they enter the IMO, fill in operational data, do a proper validation of the performance pre-fixture, and then compare the actual performance of the vessel against the warranty in place. Now, obviously that, requires charters to use a bit of market power to actually get that data from owners, but we think it's very reasonable, and we've seen cases where this works. Also, this doesn't have to be a negative thing for an owner per se. We also see more innovative owners or more owners of modern fleets who actually use this to their benefit, who, when fixing their vessel, proactively share this performance evaluation and this performance screening with the charterers to prove that they are, being truthful about the warranty and that they can back it up. And so, again, for people leading the way, both on the owners and the charter sides, there is benefits to be had by this pre-fixture. Then secondly, post-fixture, the next step is to just create transparency between owners and charters in terms of performance. So you need to create a mutually understood and respected performance reference. We need to move away from this kind of he said, she said way of doing things today, where everybody has their own interpretation and their own filtering and their own rules and the bickering, and need to agree on like a common way of evaluating performance that both sides agree on. And again, one way of doing that is, for example, a third party like Toqua, where you analyze that performance going up and down over time. And in the short term, that doesn't have to have any commercial implications yet. You can say, okay, you can't use this information for claims. There's no commercial ramifications. It's just to create trust and transparency between both sides, because I think that is the fundamental element that's missing in shipping relations today. And then once that trust is in place, then you can move on to rewarding and penalizing accordingly. And there's different ways that this could happen, right? So in shipping, it's mostly charterers who hold a lot of market power. So charterers could say, it's company policy to work with vessels who can share their verified performance upfront instead of just giving a warranty that they expect us to trust. So you can give a soft preference, or you can just make it a requirement. You can say, look, to do business with us, you need to have a third party screening your performance pre-fixture, so we know we can trust the numbers that we're going to put into our calculations that we're basing this whole trade on. A bit similar to Q88 and some other tools where you need to have it if you want to do business with top tier charterers. So these are 2 ways of going about it, but I think the best way is the floating rate, because it benefits owners and charterers in the right way. So you simply just tie your higher rate to the actual performance. Both sides agree on a way to track that objectively. And then as that goes up and down, your higher rate goes up and down as well. And I think this last one will be very effective to incentivize owners in the right way and enable them to invest much more in decarbonization and value efficiency much more. So then last question is how to act today. Let's say you see this problem, you face it every day, and you agree it's something that shipping needs to grow in, needs to evolve in. How can we act on this today? Well, that's kind of the goal of this webinar. If you want to get involved, if you want to lead the change on this, do get in touch with us via smartwarranty@toqua.ai. And you can join owners and charters already representing over 2,000 vessels today that are working with us in a sort of beta user group to shape a greener future for shipping by thinking about this problem from an owner's and a charter's point of view, to make sure that this is a format that works, that both sides can respect, and that benefits both sides fairly. And then lastly, a very overused quote, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. That's also the case here. I mean, this is a webinar done by us, by Toqua, but I want to stress this is definitely not something that we're going to be able to do alone. We realize that the industry as a whole needs to collaborate on this, come together on this, and we want to be one actor facilitating this, making this possible, mostly from a technology point of view. But we realize we have to work with many other organizations. So we're also in close touch with, class societies, industry organizations, like BIMCO, GCMD, Marsh McKinney Model Center, etc. Because we want to have those conversations with as many parties as possible to be sure we're working on one common thing instead of everybody doing different standards, different approaches. So If you want to become part of this, either because you're an industry organization or because you're an owner or charter who believes this is the way forward, please do get in touch. You can just send a mail to this mail here, and then we'll add you to the list to keep you updated on the progress we make and the tests we're doing. Or if you say, look, I'm an owner and I believe in this, and I know a charter who would also believe in this, that we work closely together with, then we can do kind of tests, which is what we're running now with some owners and charters who are leading the way to do tests to test this concept, to slowly then move towards making this reality and allowing shipping to decarbonize profitably. So that was my presentation. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Casimir. Okay, so we'll go to the Q&A session. So we've got three interesting questions. Well, just for me to try and set the context, because I heard like two separate dimensions. There's a sort of trading dimension about the price, then there's the transparency that people would rather do business with people they know more about. And I think that's actually perhaps more important than the pure price. I mean, I was thinking, as an example, I put solar panels on my house roof a year ago, and the company I chose gave a lot of data about what the panels would generate, which gave me a lot of confidence. It wasn't so much about their panels being better than anybody else's panels. Is that a good analogy for thinking about, the transparency and the confidence is what's important? What's most important here? Do you think? Is it?
Yeah, it's a combination of both. I mean, I think because there's such a lack of transparency today, most charterers just indeed value that transparency already enormously. A lot of the leading charterers in our beta user group, they say, I don't even care what they warrant the vessel at because we know it's not going to be true. I just want to know what it actually consumes so I can, use proper figures for my business, basically. So one thing is obviously the transparency, but I think once you have that transparency in place, you can then also tie that incentivization to it, which, makes more earnings for greener vessels. But indeed, it's kind of tied to each other.
Yeah. This is last comment come in from Konstantinos Lorandos. I think he's with Delta Tankers, or 90% of everything. Yes. Interesting presentation. I'm going to the bottom of the list because it requires a significant shift in mindset regarding transparency. So I guess that sort of sums up to me where we're trying to go. But it's 2025. We're not shouldn't be full of secrets anymore. That's
Yeah. No, 100% agree. I mean, it's easy to dream up these things, and if you look at it from an outsider point of view, it makes a lot of sense. But indeed, it requires a huge mindset shift in the industry. Transparency is not at all common. But that's again why we're working with this beta user group with some leading names who do see the benefits, who can work with one another to give, small benefits. And then we kind of make it into a standard slowly but surely. And then the rest of the industry will follow. So it will take time, but I'm very confident it will happen one way or another.
Wow, very good. So another interesting one, Sushil Shankar's question. So he hasn't left his company, but he obviously knows shipping very well. He's saying, why would a ship owner want to do this? Surely it's easier if I keep things as vague as possible, then nobody can blame me if I get it wrong, which is, I suppose it's the same answer. This is 2025. We're not supposed to be thinking like this anymore, but if it's not in somebody's commercially interest to reveal more information, they wouldn't. But I suppose there's always some companies who have secrecy and some companies that don't, aren't they? So
Yeah, I get the question, right? Like from an owner's point of view, there are cases where this would work against you today. If your vessel maybe isn't performing as well or this or that. And especially if all the other owners are still using the old system with all of the margin they get due to the wordings, that's beneficial to them. But that's also why it's a new system, right? And you need to work with charters who appreciate that new system, who appreciate the transparency, and who also value that transparency. So I understand it's very hard for an owner to drive this change unilaterally. It needs to come from charters as well, who say, look, we need vessels to be more transparent, and we will value them more, we will pay them more, we will prefer them over other vessels. And so it needs to come from both sides, and that's why this beta user group is so important, that both sides talk to each other, understand the hurdles on each side, and then make it work. Because just doing it unilaterally as one actor is not going to work. And that's why we're building this beta user group, a sort of critical mass of forward-thinking companies who can kind of make that shift happen together.
Wow, very good. Let's go to Nancy Evangelopoulou at the bottom, where she's asking what Toqua is doing. So, I mean, I guess in shipping, everybody has a bias, or they're representing somebody or another. She's saying, but so what would Toqua do in this relationship, and how would you be sure that you weren't on somebody's side?
That's a very valid question. And one thing we try to do is just be very transparent. So both sides get access to the same data, the same validation, methodology, and they can see everything we've done, how we've done it. Nevertheless, I understand the question that, there can always be questions or doubts. And that's also why we're actively asking, talking to class societies, to industry organizations. I mean, we're all a fan of some standards or some vetting or, something like that happening. But obviously we're not the ones to lead that. That's for class societies or other organizations to define that. And we're all for it. For now, we just want to make sure the technology is there, it's easy to use, it's trusted, and then we can look into validation and putting stamps on it from a class society. But it's a very valid question, and something that I think will mature as this concept matures as well.
Very good. So we've just seen Nancy's from Silver Lake Shipping, the chartering manager in Greece. If we go to Prakesh Kumar, so he's the vessel performance manager with Synergy in India. I think he's asking a complicated question about one of your graphs, which I can't actually remember. How the ship owners managers get rewarded. Can you please elaborate? You've got the reward and penalty are both marked as negative. I don't remember. I thought the reward was positive and the penalty was negative. I don't know if you understand.
No, yeah, he's pointing out that I forgot to change the minus to a plus on the reward side, which is indeed an oversight on my side. Thanks.
Maybe that's enough for answering that question. Yeah, very good. Okay, so if we go to the top of the list, so Anil Mane is a fleet performance analyst with Caloris in India. But I think it's a question about how your model is working. So is the platform taking into account speed loss or added consumption? If it's speed loss, how is the positive or negative percentage calculated?
Yes.
Quite following. Maybe you follow this question better than I do.
No, it's clear. So yes, of course, we take hull performance into account. That's why the model is continuously updating to reflect that as well. We also normalize for all secondary conditions, so we can also simulate for different speeds, etc. Oh, sorry, I was just still reading the question, but you already moved it. And then if you're interested in more details about how exactly we learn and we normalize, we have a lot of white papers on our website where we share a lot about that. So I would maybe recommend diving a bit deeper there.
Oh, very good. So Georgios Plousakis with a technical director of Springfield. Does your predictive fuel consumption model take into account the hull or propeller fouling or main engine performance? I'm sure it does. That's
yes.
Perhaps that's all we need to say. I mean, it's about showing the charter what's going on. I guess is the discussion here. Yeah. So should we go to Wilfred Williamson of CMA Ships? Yes, the digital era, speaking of data, is very good. I think it means how to ensure the data coming in from sensors is accurate and calibrated. How do you benchmark the sensor inputs? Well, that's exactly what your company does, I think, isn't it?
No, but it's a good question because we don't collect data ourselves. So we have to rely on, third parties or shipping companies themselves doing that. And this is a very valid remark. It's kind of what I hinted to earlier. So we do a part of data validation ourselves, which, has certain value. But today, a lot of class societies or other third-party systems also do a lot of data validation checks themselves. Like, if you share your data with DMV Veracity and they, validate it and confirm it, we can take that class verified data and use that within our system. So if you say, look, a third-party software system saying the data is correct is not sufficiently reliable to me or to the charterer or owner of charter, you can say you have to use data verified by class. And that's, for example, also a possibility. So I think this area is maturing a lot together with, regulations requiring data to be reliable.
Okay, so Jonathan Deeney, so his LinkedIn says he's performance manager with Frontline Shipping in Glasgow. Time charters are usually fixed for a certain period of time at a fixed consumption rate. Are you suggesting this is not the way to go? And real-time data should be shared all the time and adjusted throughout the period of the time charter. So are you suggesting a totally different contracting method? I guess you are, isn't it?
In a way, yes. I mean, you would still give a certain performance warranty at the beginning, but it would not just apply to a single speed or a single weather condition. It could cover, a much broader range of speeds and weather conditions because the model allows to compensate and normalize for that, which gives much more freedom to the charterer to operate the vessel as they see best and to cover more conditions. So you would kind of freeze that performance in time, but it could cover all conditions. And then over time, your performance will go up and down. And then that's kind of the relative change. So you kind of take the complexity out of it by normalizing through all the secondary dimensions and bringing it down to one single dimension. which is indeed a bit more sophisticated than what the current system is, but has all of the benefits that we discussed earlier, and there's obviously downsides to just having limited speeds that you can operate in limited conditions.
Oh, very good. So going to Singapore now, Gavin Laidlaw. So he's Chief Commercial Officer of Signal, which does a sort of decarbonisation technology around behaviour. Ship managers don't want to invest as it's a cost to pass on to the owner, and it makes their offer less competitive. The owner is reluctant because the primary benefit is with the charterer. There's no coalitions of the willing forming across the value chain that are willing to experiment and trial new technology. Yeah, I guess it's exactly what we've been talking about. Yeah, I guess it's sounds like he's describing the problem with.
Preaching to the choir. Yeah, perfect. No, I agree.
Okay.
It is challenging today, and that's why we need to change it.
Very good. So Pratik Gupta, he's a researcher with Sintef in Norway. Where are you gathering the weather data from the wind, waves, and current from? So this is more about your model. I guess it depends whichever the ship owner has or whichever systems they have, is it? Or...
We're very flexible. So as a technology, we try to remain as agnostic as we can. We have a combination of data sources we use ourselves, which are probably very similar to what most people in the industry use, but we're agnostic. So if a customer says, oh, we prefer that data source or that data source, we can also use that source. So, if the owner and charter would agree between one another, we don't want to use your data source, we want to use a third party, another data source, we can definitely support that. So we just try to be very flexible on that side.
Oh, very good. So Richard Marriott, he's an expert of fleet performance management with Ideal Ship in Germany. He's questioning the AI concept when it's a black box and how can people trust it. I'm not sure you have to trust the AI to do this. And the AI is generating the performance model, but it's the actual fuel consumption that matters at the end of the day, not what the AI thought the fuel consumption would be, isn't it?
No, it's a valid question because that's the benefit of the current system. It's quite coarse. It's not very sophisticated, and that has all the downsides we discussed today. But at least it's simple, right? Or it's verifiable, let's say, in a more easy way. And it's a very valid point that that's going to be a challenge of going into more sophisticated, more data-driven approaches. Is how do you ensure that it's valid, that it's accurate, that you can trust it? And that's why we invest a lot of time into our platform to include transparency and model validation and accuracy. And I think at the end of the day, if you can compare the model against the actual consumption, and as long as you can continuously prove that the model is consistently close to what the actual consumption is, it is reliable. So it's true that there needs to be sort of trust factor, and there needs to be sufficient transparency on that. We can't just say like, here's the model and that's the truth and you have to believe it. No, there needs to be an accuracy score, a sort of validation mechanism tied to it. And as long as that accuracy score or validation mechanism is high enough, then you can use the system and it applies. So it's a very valid question, but I think the benefits of having something that's able to normalize and to compensate for secondary conditions and to align incentives far outweighs the limited complexity that an extra step of validation incurs.
A question going through my mind. I mean, going back to 1913. So if coal was 10 times more expensive and charterers really cared about it, they could have said, right, we're going to give you money back if you use less coal than we thought you would. So it doesn't necessarily need models to do this. It's more a willingness of people to pay. That's the fundamental thing: are people willing to pay or give money back if you use less fuel? That's kind of the core question here, isn't it?
I am not sure if I understood that, Carl.
Well, so if 100 years ago, when ships were running on coal, a charterer could have said, if you use less coal than we thought you were going to, we're going to give you some money back. They could have done that. I mean, presumably they didn't do that because coal was very cheap and nobody cared how much it cost then. But if we go into a time of future fuels when everything costs 100 times more than coal.
Yeah, I mean, that's a valid point to make. Like, it was less important back then because there were a lot of other variable factors. It was impossible to measure, and maybe the cost relative to everything else was less of fuel. I don't know. I'm just following your lead on this. But it's very true that as the cost of fuel increases and we get more data, that becomes even more important to be sure what that consumption will be and that you're getting your fair shake. So yeah.
I mean, it's quite easy to measure the consumption you've had in the past because you know what fuel you use. It's predicting it that's difficult, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. The normalizing what we discussed today. Correct.
Yeah. So these two kind of complicated questions here. So Prakesh Kumar from Synergy. I'm not sure where we're going here. Do you consider the draft as 10 meters for all the vessel? How is this number arrived? Is that in all the charter parties? Is it?
Well, of course, we normalize for draft. So draft is a variable that we learn for and normalize for. But what is an interesting thing is that in shipping, if you have a warranty, typically they just call it laden or often depends on the vessel type and everything, of course, but often it's just called laden or ballast, where they don't define exactly how many meters is laden, for example. Well, if it's a meter more or less, it obviously has an impact. So that is a very valid remark. And as systems like this become more commonplace, there will also be a need for more specificity within these speed fuel warranties, that you just don't say laden, but you specify how much meter draft you mean by laden. So if it differs, that you can normalize for it.
Okay, so Pratik Gupta from Sintef is more about your models. Do you have a fouling growth model based on the temperature and salinity when the ship is idling? I think you have one of the best hydrodynamic models in the industry, aren't you? But it's a bit off the topic here, isn't it? I think the specifics of how the model is made, would you say?
I get the question. I would say today we track the performance degradation, for example, due to fouling, based on the data. So we're not trying to predict it, saying like, oh, we expect it will deteriorate by X% every month, or because you idled in this location for this duration, it will deteriorate by X%. We're more looking at the actual data, how it's actually changing after normalizing for all the conditions, what the change in performance is. So we're not trying to predict. It's maybe if functionality will develop over time as we've seen more data, more idling, but it's a highly complex topic. And if you want to reach the level of accuracy that we need for this kind of application, you just have to base yourself on the actual data. It's hard to predict what the future will be because fouling is a very complicated topic. But maybe one day, hopefully.
Yeah, very good. So Wilfred from CMA Ships in France. So how are we going to include this in the charter party? Are we going to ask BIMCO to write a standard contract, or is Toqua going to write the clause? I guess lawyers can do that part. We don't need to get to that bit.
Exactly. We just want to provide the technology, be the standard or a standard, or at least a technology providing multiple standards, whatever. As I said, we're very collaborative on this, and we don't have to be the only one doing this. We can work together with everyone else. And that's also why we're talking to other organizations such as BIMCO or other industry organizations, because we realize we're not going to do this by ourselves, right? We can provide the technology or a technology to do this, but then there still need to be other organizations who indeed, for example, come with suggestions on legal clauses, etc. But I think the hard part is not writing a legal clause, right? It's first getting owners and charterers to want this, and then figuring out a legal clause is not the hardest thing in the world. That will be like a consequence of both sides really wanting this. And that's why this beta user group that we have is just, incredibly valuable, having both sides be collaborative with one another and defining what works for them. And I think eventually that will lead to potentially a sort of standard clause. But again, we're not going to be the ones saying what exactly that has to be. We just want to be a technology that can serve that purpose.
Yeah. Do you want to sort of map out what the pre-fixture and post-fixture system would look at? Because I'm not quite sure. So pre-fixture, that's when the ship owner is saying, this is what I can do. I'm going to commit this price. So the ship owners doing their own models with perhaps software like yours to see what they can safely promise. The charter is comparing their promise with other promises. That's pre-fixture, and then post-fixture, there's some kind of reward based on what you did or didn't do, which is kind of the easy part. Well, sounds like the easier part, the post-fixture part. Is this the kind of map that we're talking about here, do you think?
Well, just to repeat what we went through earlier with the phases, right? So pre-fixture, ideally, you have the owner and charter being transparent with one another upfront, right? Where the owner shares the data required to make a proper analysis of the performance by a third party, like Toqua, for example, and that both sides agree on like that's a fair, valid way, objective way to do it, and then they base their discussions based on those figures pre-fixture. That's already, quite a big change in how things are done today. And then after fixture, both sides can keep access to, the same evaluation, and more data gets added throughout the fixture, and the models can keep updating and the tracking keeps updating. So eventually that then can be used as a reference for commercials to settle, performance changes over time. Yes.
Yeah, so they're very, very different, I suppose. So pre-fixture, I guess you're in a competitive situation where a ship owner wants to say, yes, we think we'll use more fuel than this guy, but we're confident making this promise because we've got very good models to work out what we can achieve.
Yeah, it's indeed a very different dynamic pre-fixture. Things need to move fast. There's a lot of other factors playing as well. So that's why the format will need to be different. And it will also, I think it's just a matter of making this into a standard step in the procedure, because today it isn't. But it makes a lot of sense to have more screening, more risk avoidance pre-fixture by doing something like this. But again, the exact shape, that's what we're working on now with owners and charters. So we're not going to claim we have the end-all answer here today. We have, you know, clear agreement with a lot of leading owners and charters that this is a problem and the solution has to look something like this, and we're working together with them on how to solve it. And again, we're very open to work with many other parties to make this a reality. We're not planning to do this by ourselves.
Yeah, and what I imagine would happen was if the charter has confidence in the transparency of the ship owner, or we believe in your data, then you can put their sort of bids into some kind of calculation model which compare this ship with another ship, and one ship is cheaper but another ship is more expensive but promises to use less fuel, and they can compare it. I suppose that's where we're
Exactly.
going, isn't it?
Ideally, we get there one day, Carl.
Yeah, yeah. So what do we need to do to move forward then? So we need obviously more understanding of the system possibility. I suppose that's one thing.
But I think the most actionable way to move this forward is, like, as I said, you can send a mail to smartwarranty@toqua.ai if you're interested. And especially if you're an owner or charterer and you believe in this concept and you have a good relation between there's certain good owner charter relationships you have. We can do a test. We can basically just like run a test on this. What would have happened if you had the system in place? How would it benefit you? How would it benefit the other side? And by doing so, you know, you'll get used to the concept. You can also give input so that the eventual concept that gets adopted by the market matches the needs of both owners and charterers and benefits both sides. So I think, you know, we're looking for people basically who are willing to give this a go, to try this, who see that this is the future and want to be ahead and shaping that future.
Yeah, yeah. I'm thinking about when I bought my solar panels again. So there's also providers all use the same kind of modeling software, but there was the one I use had some organization says we're going to check the models are good, so we'll give our kind of stamp on the prediction models. So I suppose it's something like this that you've got the prediction model, you've got the people that say how good the prediction models are, and the reputations of the companies, all these kind of dynamics. I suppose you need to bring in the performance into the equation. But I think it all comes back to transparency again. The more people know and trust, and the better these things can move, I suppose, isn't it?
Absolutely. Good summary.
Oh, very good. All right. Well, that's fantastic. That's a very brave and a new approach to something, and let's see where it goes. So, yeah, thank you very much.